Hello there ladies and gents, welcome to another repair video. Today we're going to be working on this Nintendo Switch Lite, and this particular console has been sent in because it's got a damaged charger port. So the reason I'm making this video is because I want to show exactly how to repair the Nintendo Switch Lite, given the fact that we can't officially buy the Nintendo Switch charging ports. So what we have to do is we have to use a original Nintendo Switch charging port, and basically we have to modify it. So the original Nintendo Switch charging port and the Switch Lite charging port in comparison are very slightly different. So the pin out is exactly the same, the pin position is exactly the same, the pitch between the pins is exactly the same, however the outer chassis isn't. So for an example here, I have a Nintendo Switch Lite with the back off, and in my box of bits I have some Nintendo Switch ports. So if we take a look here, I've got my supply of ports and they look exactly the same, however there's a very slight difference. So I'm going to show you this under the microscope and just show you exactly what I mean by a slight difference. So if you take a look at the two ports here, you can see that I've got the original Nintendo Switch port and then I've got my own official Nintendo Switch port, and like I said, the pinouts are exactly matching, so we could line those up perfectly. Same with the ones on the underneath, the hidden ones, but the problem is, like I said, the port itself is slightly longer on the original. So what we have to do is we have to basically just Dremel the outer shell down and basically make it the same size, because otherwise we end up with a little bit of a bulge in the case when it goes to putting it back on. It would actually go on, but it would overhang the case and it would cause a bulge and the case wouldn't sit down properly. Something we don't want to happen, because we don't want to basically cause it to have a lip and annoy the life out of the owner. So as you can see, even the screw holes are exactly the same. If you look underneath, we've got the normal pins, and when we take the port off the one we're working on, that will be exactly the same as well. So taking a look under the microscope at the switch that we're working on, so this is the port in question, and you can see the offending pins, they're a little bit bent up, and what's likely going to happen here is we're likely going to have some sort of collateral damage, because there are several pins which have been completely pushed down and they're touching the outer frame, which is of course grounded. So that could cause a problem, and it could cause one of the power management chips to blow, or worst case scenario, it could even cause damage to the CPU, which we don't want, because then it would not be fixable. So we're going to take it apart, we're going to take a look and see what we're dealing with. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take it apart. So I will skip through this part. I'll skip through the disassembly process until I've got the motherboard out. But while I've got your attention, if you're new to the channel and you enjoy this type of content, please be sure to hit the subscribe button. It really helps out the channel a bunch, makes me look more popular than I actually am, makes me look like people actually like me, and it helps me to grow. So yeah, thank you in advance for subscribing. If you want to support the channel, don't worry. I'm not going to ask you for any money. I'm not going to ask you for a donation, although that would be appreciated if you did. But if you want to support the channel, in the video description you'll find some Amazon affiliate links, where basically you can find links to most of the stuff which I use in the workshop. But what you can also find is an Amazon 30-day free trial. And if you set that Amazon 30-day free trial as your bookmark, then whenever you use Amazon, I get a little bit of a kickback, and that really does help out the channel. So it doesn't cost anything extra to do, but what it does is it will give me a little bit of a kickback for everything that you buy. You won't get any increased prices because of it. All you'll get is basically a nice warm fuzzy feeling inside, knowing that you're helping me to support this channel. So yeah, kind of lost my trail of thought a little bit there, but never mind. So I'll skip through the rest of this disassembly process now that I've bored you half to death, and I'll resume when the console's out of the case. Rightio, so here's the Switch Lite out of the case, ready to start working on, but the first thing I need to do is just pop this into a board holder, because we want to keep it nice and flat. And I'm going to pop it in the board holder upside down, and the reason for that is because there's a battery connector and the daughter board connector just here, so we don't want to melt those when we remove the port. So basically we just pop it into a board holder and make sure that we don't damage it during the port removal process. So I'm just going to tighten this up. This isn't the greatest board holder for this type of motherboard with the shape, but it definitely does the job. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to use some hot air on its own to allow this port to drop out. So one of the things that I do not do with Nintendo Switches is use low melt solder on the port, because if you use low melt solder, and this is just my opinion, but this is what I've found, and this is what I've found had happened every time I've had to repair traces on these, that if you use low melt solder, you can use low melt solder on the ground legs, so these points here. You can use low melt solder on the back pins, but you can't use low melt solder on the front pins. So what's going to happen is when you heat it up, the low melt solder is going to melt at a much lower temperature than the rest of the solder, so the lead-free solder. And I mean a much lower melting temperature, something like 130 degrees as opposed to around about 210 degrees. So basically, like I said, what's going to happen is the anchor points are going to melt, the back pins are going to melt, but the middle pins are going to stay solid. And you're going to think it's safe to lift this port off, when in actuality it's not going to be safe for at least another 5 seconds or so. What tends to happen a lot of the time is people will attempt to lift it off and they'll pull a little bit too hard, and this entire row of pins there is then gone because the solder isn't molten there, but it's molten everywhere else. So the port is loose because there's only one row of pins, and these pins are really weak, and you'll see why when we actually remove the port. But what I am going to do is I'm going to remove the nozzle from the hot air station. And yes, I know this looks a little bit mangled, but basically I'm going to remove the nozzle, and that's going to give me a bigger surface area to actually work with the hot air. So I'm trying not to burn myself, because I have just used it to heat up the heatsink to remove the foam without breaking it. So I'm trying not to burn myself here, and the problem with this is I've lost a couple of the screws to it when I changed the element. They rolled underneath the desk and I haven't seen them since. But I'm trying not to burn myself. I have got a new handle on the way, but that will be about 10 days. I only ordered it this afternoon, but I have got a brand new handle on the way. But at the minute, what I've got to deal with is the fact that this turns itself off and comes up with EO8 and EO2 every now and again. EO8 is a over temperature protection thing, and EO2 is a heating element communication issue. And it's all because of the way they're designed. That's for another video when I do a autopsy on this one for a video. But I have got a new handle on the way. All of this gunk here is just flux. You know, I use it every day for over 12 months, and you tend to get a lot of build up of gunk, especially when you're like me and you never clean your tools. But anyway, I've got my hot air set to 480 degrees and 40% airflow, and I'm just going to hover the hot air over the port, and I'm going to grab my tweezers, and what I'm actually going to do is hold the port in position. So I don't want this to fall. I want to be able to remove this freely when I'm ready to remove it, and when I feel it's safe to remove it. And once you've done so many of these, you kind of do get a feel for when it is going to be safe. I like to use the wiggle test, and basically just wiggle it around every now and again with the tweezers. And if it starts to move freely, I know it's getting ready to be lifted away from the board. And there goes the O2. So I don't care if this was to take me 5 minutes. It's not going to take 5 minutes, but I don't care if it was to take me 5 minutes. I want to lift this off as safely as I can. Okay, that is starting to move. And eventually I'll be able to just tap this port and it'll just fall off. There you go. Port is removed. And we shouldn't have any torn pads. Like I said, I don't care if it takes longer. The main point to it is just to keep the board as safe as I possibly can. So with that done, what I want to do is I want to be able to modify this port so as it fits onto the board. So I'm going to move the board out of the way. It's incredibly hot. But I'm going to get these two ports. Once this has cooled down, I can actually still feel the heat radiating off the actual port itself. It is very, very hot. So please, please, please be extra careful. But what I want to do is I want to get a rough guide of where I'm going to need to Dremel down to. So as you can see here, and if I actually show you this under the microscope, as you'll see there, these two particular ports are now perfectly aligned, and there's a massive difference in the size. So like I said, what I want to do is I want to actually gauge where I'm going to need to Dremel to. So I'm just going to try and line these up on top of each other. And if I can, I'm going to try and score it so as I know where to come down to with the Dremel. It doesn't actually matter if I go too far down, as long as I don't start to hit the pins which actually make a contact with the board. As long as I don't actually make a contact with those, it doesn't matter too much. I'm going to take some tweezers and just score it. So you see that? I've just scored where I want to go to. And if you take a look, on this side, you can see the score. But if we turn it around, you'll notice that it goes pretty much exactly to that line there. Pretty much exactly to the line. Just a little bit out. So what I can do now is I can take my Dremel and I can just grind away until I hit this line here. And then I know that I'm going to be roughly around about perfect. So for this part, I'm going to move the board well out of the way because I don't want any shards. But I'm going to take my Dremel, and honestly, I don't know what bit this is. I don't have a clue what bit this is. I do have several bits, but I don't know the name for this bit. I am sorry. But it's basically a pretty rough bit. And I have this on fairly low setting, so a really low setting. This is going to be a little bit loud. Headphone users beware. This is going to be a little bit loud. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start grinding away, and I'm going to try and keep it even on all sides. Okay, every so often I'm going to stop for a second, and the reason for that is because it will get hot quick. Okay, so with that pretty much level, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start grinding around the outer lip so as we don't have any rough edges. Okay, and with that done, we can put the grinder away, or the Dremel away. It doesn't have to be an official Dremel, but I do recommend it. But there is one final step, and that's going to be, well, there's actually a couple of steps. But the first final step is going to be to basically just slice away on the inside and try and make sure that there's no lip. So I'm using an X-Acto blade just to make sure that it gets the odd little bit off. And let me see if I can actually show you that under the microscope. And if you take a look on the microscope, you can actually see that there is a tiny lip inside. So we're trying to smooth that out and make sure that it's not sharp. I'll just take my X-Acto knife, be very careful here. And I'm just cutting away. To make sure that there's no lip. Probably going to ruin a blade here doing this, but it is what it is. As you can see now, that gap is nice and even. There's no lip, and we should be good. So it's going to be a little bit sharp. You can smooth it if you want, but I don't think there's any point, because the outer case is going to protect it and make sure that no one's going to cut themselves. So basically, that is the finished product, and as you can see, I pretty much came down to the line. It's not perfect, but it's as damn close. Let's take a closer look side by side. So there's the port that we're working on, and here is the official switch port. Or the switch light port rather. And that's pretty close. So it is still slightly bigger, but you know, I'm not striving for perfection here. I'm striving for functionality and the ability to make it work. It does suck that we can't buy these, but it is what it is. But that is almost pretty much exact. Okay, so the next step is going to be to prepare this area for a new port. So what I want to do is I just want to add some flux. So flux is going to help solder to flow. And I'm going to add some flux so as I can prepare the pads ready to accept the port. So the way I'm going to do that is the ground pads, which are going to anchor the port in, I want to basically clear those out. So I want to get rid of any solder that's in them. And these pads here, I want to replace the solder that's there with some fresh leaded solder, which is just much better than lead-free solder that they use at the factory. So might seem a little bit counterproductive, but I'm adding some leaded solder to the lead-free solder mix before I wick it away, and that's basically going to lower the melting temperature enough to wick it. If you try and wick lead-free solder, it's going to cause you a world of pain, especially on those pins there, because like I said, it does have a much higher melting temperature. There we go. So that's going to go a little bit dull because it's a mixture between leaded and lead-free, but we're going to take care of that now. We're going to wick it away. So I'm going to take some solder braid. In this case, I'm using Goot Wick. I'm just going to wick that away and clear those holes up nicely. That Goot Wick works absolutely fantastically. Not sponsored, but it is really good stuff. So the reason that I wick these completely away is because I want this port to be subject to as little direct heat as possible. And what I mean by that is I don't want to use the hot air for longer than I have to, because the port does still have plastic on it, even though it is covered with a metal frame. There is a risk of damaging it. So I'm going to clear these as best I can, and not only that, but when I put the port back on, I'm going to need to put the port back on with hot air from the top, so as I can get to those middle pins and actually flow those middle pins properly. So I want it to be subject to as little heat in the area as possible, and for that reason I'll clear the ground holes out, because then the only solder that has to flow is going to be on the pins themselves, and the pins themselves do not take much to actually flow the solder. Okay, so I'll clear the rest out from the other side in a minute. There is still one more thing I need to do on the other side anyway. So I might as well do that at the same time, and I'll show you what that is in a moment. Okay, you will have to excuse the yellow tint. That is the microscope camera. I can't seem to get the white balance settings set perfectly, so I apologise about that. So I'm going to tin the pins here now, and I might need to change the flux. Yeah, I think I might have to be honest. So I'm going to clean it up using isopropyl alcohol. Alright, so let's get some nice joints on here. I'll add some more flux. Then I'm going to take my soldering iron and just tin all of these legs. There we go. Some nice even joints. So let's spin the board around then. Okay, and I want to clean out these ground holes some more. Like I said, I was struggling a little bit to get the wick to fully penetrate the hole. I'll just add a little bit there. And if you're struggling to clear up the ground holes, what you can do, if I just zoom out a little bit here, is you can use a little bit of hot air to assist you. Okay, let's just see if that's cleared out properly. It's close enough. Yep, the knife goes all the way through. Take in mind I am not digging through the board here. I'm just literally using the knife as a gauge because it's got an edge where it's increasing inside, like a diagonal edge, so it's going to tell me if it's going in deep enough. So I'm not actually digging the board. There is still a little bit of solder right on the edges, but I'm not bothered about that. So let's clean this one up then. Just add a little bit of flux there. I'm going to take the soldering iron, I'm going to get a clean tip. And then I'm going to use a little bit of hot air just to assist me. There you go. That's better. That is much better. Alright. So while we're on the back of the board, while we've got the port off, what I want to do is I want to check for any collateral damage on these areas here. So if we take a look at the layout for the Nintendo Switch original, the chip would be in this orientation. What I want to do is, first of all, I want to test and make sure that, number one, we don't have a blown CPU, but number two, I want to check for any collateral damage on the chips themselves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the multimeter into continuity mode. So continuity mode is the mode that's going to beep when we complete the circuit, and I'm going to grab one of the probes, it doesn't matter which one, and I'm going to press it on ground, so any ground point will do. In this case I'll use the charger port, so I'll use the ground legs here for the charger port. So if I touch anywhere else, that's ground. So down here, for example, we've got continuity. And I'm going to check these caps, and I'm going to start with this very specific cap here. And we don't have a short there, that is absolutely great. So that means we do not have a short on the CPU. So that is good news. Okay, so I'm going to check some of these caps around here now. Just make sure that we don't have any damage to this chip. And it doesn't appear as though we do. So let's check this chip down here. And this is one of the beauties about having 0.7mm probes. It allows me to get in some nice tight spots. Okay, that's good. We don't have any damage there. So let's check this coil. So this is the battery management IC BQ24193. And the other chip that we just tested is M92T36, which is the main power management chip. That coil there has continuity, which is good. So we don't appear to have any collateral damage to the board. It just appears as though we've got a bad charging port on this one, and that is literally that. So like I said earlier on, I want to be subjecting this board now to as little heat as I possibly can, and for as little time as I possibly can as well. I'm going to set the hot air to 450, and the airflow is going to go to 60%. And I'm going to try and heat up the pins first, or rather the pads, but I'm holding the port inside tweezers like this, and I'm just going to heat up the area, keeping the air moving while I'm doing it. So the reason for that is because, like I said, there are plastic connectors around here. I don't want to melt them. Drop the port down, and I'm going to continue to flow this for a moment while I get it into position, and then I'm just going to keep pressing down on the connector, giving it a little bit of a wiggle. I think it needs a bit more flux here, and just at the right time, because EO2 happened. And just a bit of flux, and now I'm going to continue to flow it, so I'm going to reflow it into place. Remember, I want these bottom pins to melt as well, so basically I'm just going to keep moving the air around at the same time as wiggling the port to make sure that it actually makes contact with the solder pads, and that a little bit of the solder is going to transfer onto the pin itself. So you can see some of those pins turning silver as I'm doing that. I'm going to press it down, I'm going to hold it, and I'm going to move the hot air away from the board. Let that settle, and that should, in theory, be soldered. So let's just take a look. So I'm going to have a look on an angle. That appears to be sitting flat enough to the board. It's a little bit dark, I am fairly zoomed in. So I'm going to add a little bit of flux here, and I'm just going to solder these visible pins manually with the soldering iron as well, just to make 100% sure that they make a contact. I'm just going to tap each one, come back, making sure there's a healthy amount of solder on each pin. I'm not bothered about a bit of solder going onto this test point here. I'm not fussed about that. I could clear that up actually. I could use a little bit of solder wick. Not necessary, but I can. There you go. That's just an indication of where pin number 1 is. And that is done. Spray it with isopropyl alcohol and then give it a scrub with the toothbrush. Okay. And then I can see visibly now that these pins are all nicely soldered. But we do have one final step. And that final step is going to be to solder the ground legs to anchor the port in. Make sure it's not going to be snapped off again. So we'll add some flux all around. And I'm just going to move the soldering iron tip backwards and forwards just to make sure that it pushes the solder down into the ground holes, to make sure that it anchors it properly. Once I'm happy, I'll move on to the next pin, or the next hole rather. There we go. Okay, good to go. Spray it down again. I want to make sure it's nice and clean. Okay, and the final step is just to make sure, like I said, that it's nice and clean. That includes inside the port as well, so all I do is just spray it with IPA, and then just scrub inside the port with a toothbrush, make sure that all of the debris from when we were cutting down the port, or grinding down the port, and also the flux as well, is gone. So you want a really soft toothbrush for this as well, not a hard one, because otherwise you might have a chance of damaging pins. So use a nice soft toothbrush, and you're not going to have many issues, if any, with cleaning out the port. And as you'll see now, this is nice and solid, it's not going anywhere, and it should be around about the perfect size to fit back into the housing. So I'll just clean off the thermal paste here, because we're going to add some fresh thermal paste when we put it back together. But for the purpose of the video, we just want to make sure that this is going to work. So I'm going to connect up the speaker, because that's got to sit properly when we put it back together anyway. Okay, so before I connect up the battery, I'm just going to connect up the ribbons. We don't want to connect up the ribbons while there is a battery that's potentially got power connected to the board, because we don't want to cause any shorts, and if we put one of these ribbons in on an angle, it could cause problems. And the only one that we can't connect up before plugging the battery in is going to be the daughter board ribbon, because that sits over that connector, or the battery connector rather. So unfortunately we have to connect this one up with the battery already plugged in, but that's the only one that we do. Hopefully the battery isn't too flat and it's not going to take too long to charge up. Okay, that's lined up. Let's give it a test. So let's just see if this is going to work now. So we can do this one of two ways. We can look at the screen, or we can look at what we call a USB ammeter. So a USB ammeter is basically a device which has got a USB pass-through, and it tells us what kind of current is being drawn. So if we have got charging, then we're going to see a current. So I'm going to take the input side of the ammeter. You'll see that the output side is connected with a short USB cable. I'm going to take the input side, and I'm going to take my 15-volt supply, and let's flip it around. And we don't appear to have anything. We're not charging at all. Ah, there we are. And we have a charging symbol. Is it going to charge the other way? Because if it's not, then it needs to come back out and possibly be reflowed. No, it's not. Okay, so I guess that's kind of good, but that just means that basically either one of two things here. So either this is not installed properly, so the port is not installed properly, or the power management chip is bad. So one of the two, either the port isn't installed properly or the power management chip is bad. And there's only one way we're going to find that out, and that is to first of all reflow the port. So we're going to disconnect everything again. Yes, it's a bit of a pain in the backside. Sometimes it just happens. And the annoying thing is, if we only have charging on one side of the port and it's not down to the port, the M92T36 chip will be what's at fault. But the annoying thing about that is that it never shows itself. So usually we do get a short show up on M92T36, however, not always. And charging on only one side is a very common issue with M92T36 when we only get charging on one side of the port. So let's just drop this back inside the board holder here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reflow the charging port. So what I mean by that is I'm just going to apply some hot air, and I'm basically going to remelt those solder joints to a point where I can make sure that it's fully connected. It's a bit annoying to do, but it is what it is. Sometimes it happens where we have to do it. So I'm just going to get this to sit right inside the board holder. There we go. I'm going to add some flux. So a lot of the time or 99% of the time I don't use the microscope like I did on this, so it might not have flowed down properly. But I don't normally use the microscope when I'm doing a port on the Nintendo Switch because I like it to be angled straight up with the hot air. So all I'm going to do is just reflow this port to a point where the solder is molten. And press down on the port and let go. Okay, so rather than wasting time, I'm going to connect this up outside the housing. So I'm going to pop the battery in like that. Might seem a little bit ghetto, but it's absolutely fine, honestly. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in the charger. Okay, and it activates that side, which means that it's charging the battery. We don't need to see the screen. Let's have a look at this side. And it activates that side, which means that the port wasn't installed correctly. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put this back inside the housing. I'm going to let the battery charge up for 10 minutes and hopefully it doesn't take too much longer than that. I'm going to go and grab a cup of coffee while it's charging the battery, and when I come back, hopefully I can give this a full test and make sure that everything works. But not before I've cleaned the board. Right, okay ladies and gents, so this is now done. So weird thing happens with my 15 volt source where it will flicker on and off once the console starts to boot. Very strange, but it's not the console, it's just the plug that I use. It's a Ugreen 65 watt charger which I use to power the dock and the 15 volt charger at the same time. But when it turns on, it flickers. It does this weird thing. I don't know what it is, but never mind. But the console is now turning on and it's now charging, and it appears to all be working. So I'm going to run through some tests. We do get the charging symbol on both sides, and that means that the USB-C detect is working and that the port itself is working as well. And let's just confirm a few things work. So I've got myself a little checklist and I'm going to go through a few things. So I've cleaned the port already. So the port itself is good. Make sure the touchscreen works. Make sure that the charger doesn't go off when we wiggle it. Nope. Okay, so that's all working. I'm just going to twist that round that way just to make sure there's no strain on it. And the touchscreen appears to work as well. So let's just make sure that all of the buttons work. Yes, indeed. Let's make sure it picks up my internet. Or my Wi-Fi rather. Yep. Controllers and sensors. Test input. Can't test those ones, but we can test those in a minute. Yep. All of those work. Capture works and home works. Yep. No drift either, which is good. Let's test again. Make sure that works. It does. One little thing to do. Whenever we test it with a game, we go to data management. As long as the game's not already installed, we go to software. We go to that game and we delete it. Don't want to leave software that the customer doesn't want. So we delete that software. Let's flip it around. And let's test an SD card. So I've got my test card here. Yep, so that's picking up. Let's set that to later. This appears to be done. So this is all working, and I'll just show you under the microscope at the port, and just show you that it's not bulging and that the port is sitting nicely inside the outer housing. And as you can see here, it lines up absolutely beautifully with the edge of the housing, and it's not going to push out and cause a bulge in the case. Flip it around. Lines up nicely there, a little bit out, a little bit too far in, but you're never going to get it perfect unless you are super hands, which I am definitely not. But as long as it's inside the case and not pushing out, then you're not going to get a bulge, and it's going to be absolutely beautiful. So there we go, this console is now repaired. Luckily there was no collateral damage on this, and luckily the customer hasn't got to pay extra for further diagnostics and repairs, such as the power management chip and things like that. It was just a simple case of modifying the port and getting it to fit inside the Nintendo Switch Lite. But this console is done, the customer can have this back working, and everything is hunky-dory. But that's going to be it for this video. If you have any comments or questions, leave them down in the comment section down below. I will always do my best to answer. If you enjoy this type of content, like I said, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell notifications so that you're notified whenever I release a video. If you enjoy this type of content and you want to support the channel, you can do so by becoming a Patreon supporter using the link in the video description. You can become a channel member using the join button down below the video, or you can use the Amazon affiliate links in the video description. I do get a kickback for all of the Amazon affiliate links whenever you buy anything whatsoever. It doesn't matter whether it's anything on the list in the description or whether it's just something random like a cat treat. It doesn't make a difference, it all helps the channel. And like I said, if you set one of those links as a bookmark, every time you use Amazon through that bookmark, then I'll get a little bit of a kickback. And that will massively help the channel. But that's going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later. Bye for now.